You've seen the video. Everyone has. 11 seconds of footage that broke the internet. A massive slab of basalt embedded in a cliff face at Ireland's Giant's Causeway, slowly pushing outward like a door swinging open on ancient hinges, revealing nothing but pure darkness behind it. 11 seconds of footage that has been viewed hundreds of millions of times across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. 11 seconds that made people stop scrolling, lean forward, and ask the question that Ireland has been asking for centuries. What is hidden inside these ancient stones? And here's the thing that nobody telling you this story has been brave enough to say out loud. The truth behind that video, the real story of what that footage actually is, where it came from, why it was made, and what it reveals about something far older and far more genuinely mysterious than any fake viral video could ever be. That truth is more shocking than anything any AI-generated content channel could possibly invent. Because the real Ireland, the archaeological Ireland, the Ireland that scientists and researchers have been quietly uncovering for decades, that Ireland contains secrets so extraordinary, structures so impossibly precise, discoveries so recently made and so deeply unsettling to everything we thought we knew about prehistoric humanity, that no dramatization, no special effect, no AI-generated stone door could ever compete with it. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with what that video actually is. And then let's go somewhere far more extraordinary. The clip you've seen, the 11-second video of a stone door opening at Giant's Causeway, was not filmed by a tourist drone. It was not discovered by accident. It was not analyzed by archaeologists, geologists, or any scientific body. It is a promotional marketing video produced in 2015 by the National Trust of Northern Ireland as part of a tourism campaign called the Sleeping Giant Campaign, a clever cinematic piece of storytelling built around the ancient Irish legend of Fionn Mac Cumhaill, the mythological giant warrior of Irish folklore, who, according to legend, built the Giant's Causeway itself to reach his Scottish rival across the sea. The door in the video was engineered for a marketing campaign. The darkness behind it was deliberate framing. The seamless closure at the end was the point, a beautifully produced piece of mystery content designed to make you want to visit Northern Ireland. Reuters fact-checked it. Lead Stories fact-checked it. Community members local to the Giant's Causeway region confirmed it. People from the area stated plainly, there is no door. There has never been a door found. The 40,000 interlocking basalt columns at Giant's Causeway, those extraordinary hexagonal formations that stretch from the cliffs into the sea like the floor of some ancient cathedral, were formed by volcanic activity roughly 50 to 60 million years ago, during a period geologists call the Paleogene. They are not a vault, they are not a door, they do not contain chambers. They are one of the most spectacular geological formations on the surface of the planet, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and they require no embellishment because what they actually are is already more astonishing than anything a fake video could claim. Every story you've seen built on top of that original clip, the 7 figures standing inside the basalt, the one that disappeared 4 days later, the archaeological teams discovering hidden chambers, the symbols that don't match any known civilization, all of it is fabricated. AI-generated storytelling designed to capture your attention and hold it through a mix of manufactured suspense, vague scientific language, and the one thing that has worked on human beings since the beginning of recorded time, the implication that something is being hidden from you, that authorities know more than they're saying, that the real truth is being suppressed. None of it is real. But here is the genuinely remarkable thing. The reason content like this spreads, the reason hundreds of millions of people have clicked on a video of a fake stone door at Giant's Causeway, is not stupidity. It is not gullibility in the simple sense of the word. It is something much older and much more interesting. It is the fact that Ireland genuinely contains mysteries, real ones. Documented, excavated, scientifically studied mysteries that have no complete explanation. Stone structures built 5,000 years ago by people with tools made of antler and bone, constructed with a precision that modern engineers struggle to fully account for. Monuments aligned to astronomical events with an accuracy that required either extraordinary mathematical sophistication or thousands of years of observation that we have no record of. Chambers sealed for millennia, opened by archaeologists in the 20th century, revealing human remains and carved symbols that are still not fully understood. The fake stone door went viral because somewhere, deep in the part of the human brain that processes story and wonder and the mystery of origins, people recognized something true, even if the specific video was fiction. Ireland is a place where the stones genuinely do hold secrets, just not the ones that AI-generated content channels want to sell you. Let's go to the real Ireland. Let's walk into the places that are actually there, where archaeologists have actually entered, where what they found actually changed what we know about the earliest chapters of human civilization. Because this story begins not in 2026 and not with a drone. It begins in 1699, with a laborer's shovel hitting something that shouldn't have been there. The year was 1699. A man named Charles Campbell had recently purchased a piece of land in County Meath, in the Boyne Valley of Ireland. His workers were digging, standard work, ground clearing, nothing remarkable expected. And then a shovel hit stone, and then another stone, and then a passage. And then, as the workers followed the passage inward, they found themselves inside a chamber built from massive slabs of stone decorated with carved symbols that nobody in 1699 could read or interpret, capped by a ceiling that had somehow held its own weight for longer than anyone then alive could possibly have imagined. They had stumbled, without any warning, into one of the most significant archaeological sites on Earth, a site that would not be properly understood for another 268 years. A site that, when it was finally properly excavated and studied in the 1960s, would rewrite the timeline of human civilization. The monument is called Newgrange. It sits in the Boyne Valley in County Meath. And what it is at the most basic factual level is this: a passage tomb built approximately 5,200 years ago, around the year 3200 BC, by Neolithic people who had no metal tools, no written language, no wheel, and no technology more advanced than carefully shaped stone, bone, and timber. It is older than Stonehenge by 500 years. It is older than the Great Pyramid of Giza by 600 years. It covers more than 1 full acre of ground. It stands 11 meters high. Its outer facade is constructed from gleaming white quartz, quarried from sources in County Wicklow, over 70 kilometers away, and transported in an era before the wheel, using human labor, wooden sledges, and riverboats. The inner passage is 19 meters long. It leads to a cruciform chamber, a chamber shaped like a cross, capped by a corbelled roof constructed with such precision that it has remained completely watertight for 5,200 years. No leaks, no collapse, no structural failure. For 5 millennia, while empires rose and fell, while Rome was built and destroyed, while the entirety of recorded history unfolded above it, the corbelled ceiling of Newgrange held. But the structure itself, as extraordinary as it is not the most astonishing thing about Newgrange. The most astonishing thing is something that was known locally for generations before any archaeologist arrived to study it. Something that the people of County Meath had whispered about for centuries without fully understanding what they were describing. Something that, when a professor of archaeology from University College Cork named Michael J. O'Kelly finally experienced it directly, on the morning of December 21st, 1967, left him standing in silence inside a 5,000-year-old chamber, watching something happen that no scientist had witnessed since prehistoric times. On the morning of the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, December 21st, the rising sun aligns perfectly with a narrow, rectangular opening above the entrance passage of Newgrange. This opening is called the roof box. It is small, it is precisely sized. And for exactly 17 minutes, as the winter solstice sun rises above the horizon southeast of the monument, a single beam of golden light travels through that roof box, down the full 19 meters of the passage, and strikes the back wall of the inner chamber, illuminating carvings of triple spirals that have sat in darkness for the rest of the year, for 17 minutes every year, without fail, for 5,200 years. This is not an accident. It cannot be an accident. The monument is constructed so that this alignment occurs precisely with the sun at its lowest point in the annual cycle, on the specific day that represents the turning of the year. The builders of Newgrange, people who did not have written mathematics, who did not have telescopes, who did not have any of the tools we associate with astronomical precision, built a monument that performs an astronomical function with an accuracy that modern surveyors have measured and confirmed. The angle of the passage, the height of the roof box, the orientation of the entire structure, all of it was engineered 5,000 years ago by people whose names we will never know and whose spoken language has left no trace. Professor O'Kelly, who led the excavations of Newgrange from 1962 until 1975, was the first modern human to experience the winter solstice illumination directly. He had read the local accounts. He had heard the stories. He had studied the orientation. And on December 21st, 1967, he stood alone inside the chamber, because none of his colleagues believed the alignment would be precise enough to work, and watched the beam of light enter. He described the experience in terms that are unusual for a scientist writing in an archaeological report. He said the light was extraordinary, that it filled the chamber completely, that in those 17 minutes he understood something about what the builders of Newgrange had intended that no amount of measurement and analysis had been able to convey. What exactly did they intend? Here is where genuine mystery begins. Not the manufactured mystery of a fake stone door, but the real mystery that comes from trying to understand minds separated from ours by 5,000 years of history. The most widely accepted interpretation among archaeologists is that the winter solstice alignment was a ritual representation of death and rebirth. The sun descending to its lowest point, the moment when the ancient world was darkest, coldest, most hostile, and then turning, beginning its return, bringing light back into the world. The passage tomb as a womb as much as a tomb. The light entering the chamber on the solstice as a symbolic act of regeneration. The dead, whose cremated remains were found inside the chamber, being touched by the returning sun, carried from death toward whatever the Neolithic people of Ireland believed came next. The carved triple spirals on the back wall of the chamber, the ones the solstice beam strikes directly, are among the most recognizable symbols of Neolithic Ireland. They appear throughout Newgrange and at nearby sites. Some archaeologists interpret them as representations of the sun's movement. Some see them as symbols of the three great cycles: life, death, and rebirth. Some have proposed connections to the concept of a vortex, an opening between the world of the living and the world of the dead. What they mean with certainty, after 5,000 years, is something we cannot say. The people who carved them took that knowledge with them. But they are not the only secrets Newgrange has given up to modern archaeology. Because in 2025, something changed in our understanding of who built this place, and the change was significant enough to make headlines in scientific journals worldwide. For years, the dominant theory about Newgrange was that it was built for and by an elite ruling dynasty. Earlier DNA analysis of the remains found inside the chamber had identified what appeared to be evidence of a high-status individual whose parents were closely related. Incest, by modern definition, of the kind historically practiced by ruling classes seeking to concentrate power within family lines. The interpretation was dramatic and compelling. An incestuous ruling elite of Neolithic Ireland, buried in their monument at the center of a complex of tombs that stretched across the Boyne Valley, commanding a society sophisticated enough to build structures that have outlasted every civilization the ancient world produced. Then in 2025, a team of archaeologists from University College Dublin, led by Associate Professor Neil Carlin and Associate Professor Jessica Smith, published a comprehensive new analysis of ancient DNA extracted from the remains of 55 individuals buried across the Irish Passage tomb landscape. And what they found overturned the dynasty theory completely. The people buried together in these tombs, at Newgrange, at Knowth, at Douth, and at sites across Ireland, were not, for the most part, close relatives. They did not share the genetic profile of a ruling family. They were, in many cases, as distantly related as sixth cousins. They came from different localities. Chemical analysis of bone structure showed that some of the people buried at these monuments had grown up in places far from where they were interred. They were travelers, strangers by blood, and yet they were buried together in the most sacred spaces their civilization knew how to build. What this suggests, what the UCD team concluded, using a concept they called kinwork, is that Neolithic Ireland's concept of family, of community, of who belonged together in death, was not primarily about blood. It was about shared life, shared ritual, shared ceremony. The people who built Newgrange and who were eventually buried inside it formed their bonds through what they did together. The work of constructing these monuments, which took an estimated 300 people 30 years to complete. The rituals they practiced inside, the astronomical observations they maintained across generations, the ceremonies that marked the turning of the year. Their family was not their bloodline. Their family was their community. And Newgrange was not a royal tomb. It was a monument to a way of living together that we do not have a modern word for. This is what real archaeological discovery looks like. Not a fake stone door, not AI-generated imagery of seven figures disappearing from a scan. A careful, meticulous, DNA-based rethinking of what we believed about people who lived 5,000 years ago. A rethinking that reveals them as more sophisticated, more socially complex, and more fundamentally interesting than the simpler story of kings and dynasties had allowed. But Newgrange is only one monument in one valley, and Ireland is covered in them. Less than an hour's drive from Newgrange, on a hilltop in County Meath, sits a site called Loughcrew, home to at least 20 passage tombs, some of which predate Newgrange itself, making them over 6,000 years old. One of the most extraordinary is a tomb called Cairn T, inside Cairn T on the morning of the spring equinox, March 21st, and again on the autumn equinox in September, a beam of sunlight enters through the passage and strikes a carved stone inside the chamber. The carving is called the Equinox Stone, and for 50 minutes, not 17, but 50 full minutes, the sunbeam moves slowly across the surface of the stone, illuminating an intricate pattern of solar symbols that were carved into it by people who built this chamber specifically so that this would happen. Twice a year, every year, for 6,000 years. The builders of Loughcrew were not marking one astronomical event. They were marking the entire solar calendar. The solstices, the equinoxes, the turning points of the year that determined when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for winter, and when to expect spring. These monuments were not just tombs, they were calendars. They were observatories. They were the technological infrastructure of a civilization that had no writing, no metal, and no advanced toolmaking. and yet understood the movement of celestial bodies with an accuracy that allowed them to encode that understanding in stone, in structures that have transmitted the information forward for 6,000 years without losing it. In the same valley where Newgrange sits, along the River Boyne, archaeologists discovered something else, something that only became visible in the summer of 2018 during an extreme drought. When the water table dropped and the soil dried out, the crop marks left by ancient buried structures became visible from the air in a way they hadn't been in living memory. Aerial surveys revealed a ritual landscape of extraordinary complexity surrounding Newgrange. Henges, palisades, mortuary enclosures, timber settings, and structures unlike anything that had been previously documented at the site. A great palisade, a triple arrangement of massive timber uprights, arranged in a design of such complexity that archaeologists said its function or functions raised more questions than they answered. Long mortuary enclosures where the dead were exposed on raised platforms before burial, circular gathering spaces large enough to accommodate what must have been significant portions of the regional population. The Boyne Valley, it turned out, was not just the location of 3 famous tombs. It was an entire ritual landscape, a prehistoric sacred geography that extended across the valley floor and the surrounding hills, built over centuries and millennia by successive generations who continue to add to, modify, and reuse a place they clearly understood as profoundly significant. And most of this landscape was invisible until a drought in 2018 accidentally revealed it from the air. That is real archaeology. That is what actually happens when scientists actually study Ireland's ancient past. Not a sudden dramatic revelation behind a moving stone door, but a slow, careful, cumulative accumulation of knowledge that keeps changing the story in ways that are more interesting than anything a content algorithm could manufacture. And the Ireland of genuine archaeological discovery does not stop with Neolithic monuments. Because in 2025, at the same time, the UCD team was rewriting the story of who built Newgrange. A separate analysis was being published about something extraordinary found at another Irish site, a finding that challenged one of the most basic assumptions archaeologists had been making about Irish prehistoric society for decades. It had long been thought that the change from communal, egalitarian burial practices to elite, hierarchical ones, from the Neolithic world of kinwork and community to the Bronze Age world of individual high-status burials, was a gradual shift, a slow evolution in how societies organized power and marked death. What the new DNA evidence showed was that this shift happened faster and more completely than anyone had realized. One site documented the transition precisely. A tomb used for communal burials of an entire community over the course of 100 years, 300 individuals, cremated and interred together, followed almost 1,000 years later by a completely different burial pattern, where only certain individuals, defined by status, were allowed inside. The last burial in the sequence was a young man of high status, buried intact, not cremated, as earlier burials had been, with an ornate necklace and a dagger. A single individual, alone, marked as special, separated from the community dead by 1,000 years of changing values. Somewhere in those 1,000 years, a society that defined itself through shared work and shared ceremony was replaced by one that defined itself through individual power and inherited status. The stones recorded the transition. The DNA confirmed it. And the implications for how we understand the origins of hierarchy, the origins of inequality, the origins of the political structures that have defined human civilization ever since, are genuinely profound. This is what real discovery looks like. It doesn't announce itself with 11 seconds of cinematic footage. It doesn't come with a countdown or a dramatic reveal. It comes from laboratories in Dublin and Cork and Belfast, from researchers spending years extracting and analyzing DNA from cremated remains, from surveyors mapping crop marks from aircraft during unusual weather conditions, from archaeologists lying in the dirt of passage tomb chambers on December 21st, waiting for a beam of winter sunlight to confirm a theory about what 5,000-year-old people understood about the sky. And it produces questions that are more unsettling than anything a fake stone door could suggest. Because the questions that real Irish archaeology now asks are not what is hidden in the dark behind that stone. They are questions like, how did people who had been living without hierarchy for centuries lose it so quickly? How did societies that buried their dead together, based on shared life rather than shared blood, become societies that buried their dead alone, based on who their parents were? What happens to a community when kinwork, the bonds formed through shared ritual and shared labor, is replaced by bloodline? And what does it mean that Ireland's stones recorded this transition 5,000 years before political philosophy had the language to describe it? The Giant's Causeway is real. Its 40,000 hexagonal basalt columns are real, formed by volcanic cooling 60 million years ago, shaped by the same geological forces that built the coastline of the North Atlantic. The legend of Fionn mac Cumhail is real, one of the great stories of Irish mythology, one that has been told in the Irish language and its predecessors for longer than written records can trace. And the National Trust's marketing campaign was, in its own way, a genuinely clever piece of creativity, a piece of storytelling that tapped into something true about the Irish landscape, even if the specific footage was constructed. But the real Ireland, the Ireland that has been waiting behind the stones all along, does not need a fake door. It has real doors. The entrance to Newgrange, 19 meters long, precisely aligned to a date in the astronomical calendar, leading to a chamber where the winter solstice has been arriving on schedule for 5,200 years. It has real carvings that no one fully understands. It has real DNA that is rewriting what we know about how ancient societies organized themselves. It has real aerial discoveries that are only becoming visible now, in the 21st century, because the right weather conditions briefly allowed us to see the full shape of something that has been beneath our feet for millennia. The fake stone door went viral because human beings are drawn to mystery, because we want to believe that there are hidden things, that the world is larger and stranger and more layered than the surface reveals. And on that point, on the fundamental instinct that drives the fascination, the viral video is not wrong. There are hidden things. There are things in the Irish landscape that are stranger and more layered than most people know. They just require archaeology to find them, not AI to invent them. And archaeology, slow, careful, and glamorous archaeology, conducted by researchers who spend decades working in cold chambers and reading ancient DNA from fragments of cremated bone, has been finding them continuously, updating them, revising them, producing answers that immediately generate new, more interesting questions. On the winter solstice of every year, a small number of people, selected by lottery from thousands of applicants, are allowed into the inner chamber of Newgrange to witness the sunrise illumination directly. They stand in the dark. They wait. And then, as the sun rises over the hill to the southeast, the light comes in, a beam, golden, precise. Moving slowly down the passage and into the chamber, illuminating the triple spirals for 17 minutes before the angle shifts and the darkness returns for another year. Those people standing in that chamber are standing where human beings stood 5,200 years ago on the same morning, watching the same light arrive, connected across a distance so large that it encompasses the entirety of recorded human history. That connection is real. It is documented. It is there every December for 17 minutes. That is the real Ireland. That is what came out when archaeologists actually entered the stones, and it shocked everyone who was paying attention, not because it was invented, but because it was true.